Hey, this is Karen, Coach's Corner Chats, and joining me is Michael Prunty. Michael, where are you at and what are you up to?
I'm at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is an NCAA Division III institution, and I'm the head coach on the women's side here at Hamline.
How long have you been at Hamline?
This is my third season, so I was hired in May of 2022. So it's been a really rush through. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years or three seasons at least already. So.
When you first got there to Hamline, what were some of the things that you wanted to get in place to get to the point where you're at now?
Yeah, coming in May, as any college coach knows, you're pretty much at the end of the academic year. So you miss the spring or the non-traditional training season. You miss that recruiting class a little bit. And so to be honest, the first year was evaluation, just to get to know the team, get to know, the type of people we have, the institution, the conference, all the pieces that help to start shape your next steps. So that was year one, was learning about the group, learning about the type of student athletes we had. Year two was, all right, now how do we start making the changes that we felt were necessary to bring success, and trying to do that in a really competitive Division III conference that doesn't really give you a lot of room to breathe. And so that first year was, we were learning on the fly. Second year is, all right, now what's the task in front of us? How do we start to make the changes we need? And then now year three is, I now have two recruiting classes in that were mine, or at least the part of mine. It means that I had the conversation with them. I shared them what the commitment looked like. This is what our program looks like. So now we're starting to see a little bit of the shift in personalities and the type of player that's in the program, which is always good to see.
What is one of the draws to Hamline? I mean, I hear Minnesota and I automatically think cold and snow. What is it that draws players to Hamline?
Yeah, I think the draw is, we're in a small private liberal arts institution that's in a city of a 3.7 million metro. So you have the draw of everything that happens in a big city. You have outlet, you have connections with all the pro sports, you have internships, opportunities, research at the major universities here in town. But then you also still get the attention of a small private liberal arts school as far as connection with professors and the care that they give you to continue to be successful in the classroom, out of the classroom, and then in our case on the field. Minnesota is a little unique. It is a bit of a mecca of higher education when it comes to small private liberal arts schools. 5 of our 12 conference teams are based in the Twin Cities. There's 4 to 5 other schools on our same street. So again, you have this access to this small private liberal arts education, but then you're also surrounded by like-minded institutions. So our street is busy, full of college students up and down it. So it's kind of a blend of, you get a big city or sometimes a big school feel because there's college students everywhere, but then you also get to do it on a small campus and still get the attention that you want. So it's kind of how I explain it to our athletes, is that they have the access to one of in my opinion, one of the coolest cities, or 2 cities, because we're twin cities, right at your fingertips, and you get to use it as you want. But then you also get that small community. If you want to stay right here on campus, you have it. So it's the blend of both worlds.
You mentioned the conference you play in being very competitive. What is it about the conference as a whole that makes that quality of teams?
I think one is tradition. It has a pretty long history of supporting women's soccer, which is not always the case in different parts of the country. So, you're looking at programs that are around since the late 70s to early 80s, which is not as common. So there's a tradition of soccer in our conference. The second thing is the Midwest is very well steeped in tradition of Division III athletics. And our conference is no different as far as the type of institutions, the quality of education our athletes get, but then also they understand the level of play sometimes is misconstrued in pockets of the country where Division III is not a thing. So they don't understand what it is. They just know that it's non-scholarship athletically. So they don't know how good it is, and they don't know the level of play that exists. And I think especially with our institutions in our conference and including Hamline is, our students come to us looking for, they want to be challenged equally academically as much as they're challenged academically, as much as they're challenged socially. They don't want to have to forfeit one for the other. So they're driven academically. They really demand a lot from themselves in the classroom, and they treat soccer or their athletics no different. They want to be challenged. It needs to be pushed. And in our case, they get to do it out of choice. Like their situation, our university doesn't change if they wake up tomorrow and don't want to play soccer. They're there because they want to play, which makes them naturally more driven because it's their choice. They're there. They want to be there. They want to keep playing. And that creates a really good environment for, further developing them as athletes and obviously as humans as well.
When we look back at Michael's start, were you playing soccer as a youth? How did you get into soccer even as a youngster?
Yeah, I joke with my athletes because I'm from Iowa, and I'm like, as I always joke, I said, I'm as stereotypically an Iowan as you get. Like, I grew up in the country, surrounded by cornfields. You know, my parents were both come from farm families, like the farthest thing from soccer in the state of Iowa. But I got lucky that I happened to be closer to a bigger city, quote, bigger city for Iowa, and I got access to soccer. And that just changed my view. I think I've always, the game has connected me culturally to parts of the world that I wouldn't have ever experienced if it wasn't for soccer. And so that's kind of how I got there. I came from a family of all my uncles are football and wrestling coaches. So I was the weird one who chose soccer, who didn't, I played football, I wrestled, I did all that thing, but I pursued coaching a sport that no one understood, no one in my family got. And, but it's a fit for me. It's a fit for, that freedom and expression that I always say the boringest human from middle America could find some, like I always say, I have a little bit of flavor, like added spice to my life that I didn't get being surrounded by cornfields. So that's kind of like where I always think my path is a little bit different, because soccer wasn't part of my family. It wasn't a common thread. And I kind of found it, and it drew me in. And now I get to spread that to other people and hopefully catch them up to what this game could bring for them on many levels. But that's really my background. I said, grew up in a more smaller town where I played every sport, but then soccer was the better fit. Was able to, travel to Brazil as a kid to play and start to see things and open my world up. And then I pursued Division III athletics on my end at an institution in Iowa that, again, just continued to remind me how great it is and how great coaching is. I always knew I was going to be a coach. It was a family tradition. But I started out actually as a wrestling coach right out of college and coaching soccer a little bit. But then, like I said, I couldn't get away from it. It became my outlet to the game. And it's followed me since, pursuing anything from collegiate coaching to coaching pre-professional men USL2 to being assistant director at clubs. It's something that I can't avoid. I stay in it no matter what.
What is that environment like when you do have a family of coaches? Is it a super competitive? Is there lots of talking as they're watching games, like you're watching football, or if it's a wrestling thing or even soccer now? What are those conversations like?
I think the most common conversation was always about not the sport itself. It was everything that comes with working with young athletes. It is the trials and tribulations, dealing with a tough athlete, or maybe someone who comes from maybe a tougher home life situation. How do we support them? How do we help them? The conversation's always about the type of people that they interacted with and helped through the journey. And I think that was the coolest part, the relationship piece, and talking about how, their former players became coaches and how they come back and see them. And it was always more about that. I think that piece is what it became, a lifestyle of that. You're surrounded by athletes, you're helping them pursue goals, be it sometimes academic, sometimes not. And I think that's what drew me more to it. I think obviously we're all competitive and the game day is the biggest day, but when my uncles that were all coaches sat around, it was more of the trials and tribulations of dealing with young people and the ups and downs. And jokingly, I had an uncle who was a football coach, and every time you asked him how the team was going to be, he was always like, we're going to be young this year. It was like the classic coach conversation of, I'm dealing with another young group and how we're going to get them experienced. And I think I think not surprisingly, if I sat around, I probably sound just like them now, but just speaking about a different sport. But yeah, it was more of always the stuff away from the field that seemed to be what drew us into the conversations.
With a family that's not real big into soccer, how do you find those opportunities to play? You said there was opportunities in like a big city near you. How did you get your footing to, play maybe at the high school level or travel soccer and what have you?
Yeah, I got lucky to be surrounded by some good parent groups that helped my family and pushed us into like the competitive soccer world. And, what was ODP and what was college soccer and what does high level soccer look like? And my parents were very hesitant at first because they're like, we need to pay X amount of money. This is different than what everything else is. And, being able to travel to, different states for tournaments and starting to open their eyes. And they started to see the value of like anything, like you want to be challenged as an athlete. I was a competitive person. So I wanted an environment that was tough and I wanted to grow and get better. And I think that's what helped my parents see the value of advancing in the game from a soccer perspective. And soccer was a little bit more unique, that you weren't getting that from the high school experience. You needed to seek out other opportunities when I grew up to find that level of competition. And so, I was lucky to have a couple peers that had parents that were really influential, that kept pushing me and then kept pushing my parents into the world of soccer. And and I'm, oddly enough, I'm the only one that's really still in the game out of all those people that had it. I'm the one that still remains and is still coaching. So definitely a lot of respect for those family groups that helped me out.
You mentioned the opportunity to play in Brazil. What was that experience like? One, just even traveling there, and then two, what's the soccer culture like there?
Well, it was 14 years old. My youth coach was Brazilian, and him coming into middle of nowhere Midwest and trying to help explain soccer culture. And this is mid 90s when Brazil had just won the World Cup in 94. And a big push was, again, the cultural experiences and understanding what the game feels like, looks like, different than how much more important it is to different parts of the country or different parts of the world. And yeah, so we were able to take a group of U14, U15 players, and we went down there and played in an international tournament. Like U15 Japanese national team was there. Some clubs were there. Like the level was well beyond our level. And it reminded us of a couple of things. One is we're very far from operating at the top end of the game. As much as we're good where we're at, we're very far from it, was the reminder. But then at the same time, like over the games and through the time down there, like the fact that if we engross ourselves in that culture and that environment, we can also compete and play if we spend the time and commit to it. And then the biggest piece was they wanted to ask more about. We played a game in a smaller village just in the state of Sao Paulo, and they had like a halftime show. The game was on the radio, and this is U15 boys soccer. And the game was broadcasted on the radio, and I was the halftime like show. They came and interviewed me at halftime, and their question was like, "What's the difference between the soccer in the United States and in Brazil?" And they wanted to know more about the United States. Again, this is mid '90s and what soccer was like then. And again, just the excitement for what it is to be an American and that experience at the time and what it meant to them. But then how we were just taking all in the cultural differences and what soccer meant to them. We actually won that game, so it was funny. Like their team was like in tears at the barbecue that they hosted for us. And obviously we were celebrating, but the shame that they had to lose to a set of Americans, was going to stay with them at least for a couple more days. So, but yeah, it was a good experience. Again, it reshaped how I saw it. And so when I came back, as a youth player, it continued to help us grow and understand the game at a deeper level.
You talk about going and playing at a D3 level. What was your college experience?
It's, I try to share this with our current Division III athletes. Division III soccer at the time was still different. It was very much it wasn't supported the way it is now. What they have access to facilities was different. My freshman year, the team qualified for won the conference tournament and played the NCAA tournament, and we had to use the wrestling team's warm-ups because we didn't have matching warm-ups for the NCAA tournament. It was just a different time. And but it was lucky. We were still very much an international type team. We had Germans, we had Brazilians. We were almost what NAIA looked like in those days, Division III. It was still like we're always going to say it was just as good as it is now, but it was the right fit as far as the level of competition, that feeling that it meant more, that soccer was a bigger deal at the college level. And I think that's the biggest takeaway is, as I share with our athletes, it's one of the few times, or sadly right now in the American system, is that college is the last time where it feels like soccer is still a big deal. The results matter. The support structures are there. You get to be on chartered buses. They're going to feed you, even if at the time it was like you got $5 to try to eat on. And then, in the early 2000s, but you got taken care of. And that doesn't happen often once you leave college soccer. And so, just to be able to commit to something like that for 4 years, and the value of it obviously off the field is huge.
You mentioned the Brazilian coach at the youth level and even the coach at your college level. What were some of the things that you kind of look back on and take away from them that you kind of have said, I really like those types of things. I look back at them as a quality coach.
Yeah. And I think this is how I even talk to you're going to take something away from every coach. It's either like how I want to do things, how I don't want to do things. When I look back on that, what I would give my college coach, and so my club coach was the assistant at the college as well. What they did really well was they recruited well. They got really good players together. And then for the most part, they kind of backed off and let them play. And at the time, when you have like a German center back, a Brazilian striker, and a Colombian at center mid, like there was some soccer played in between there, and they could play pretty well. But my takeaway is I say this in my recruiting with my players, is that the only reason I improved as a player in college is because I was around better players and I played against better players. If my experience didn't include me playing and I was on the sideline watching, I wouldn't probably have got to improve the way I did, just out of like opportunity. And it's really shifted from my experience as a college coach is it's important to me that regardless of playing time, our environment should be one that's developmental and keeps you growing as a player. because maybe not everyone's going to be able to have the same amount of game time to grow. So we've got to create other ways to help you grow, and be it through individual development plans, through video review, through, giving you more feedback and making sure you're getting the opportunity and training to improve. Like, the biggest piece is our environment needs to help you get better. And so I'd say, like, and it's not to mean in a negative, it's more of that. That's probably the lesson I took away the most, is that in my role, I got to make sure I'm creating an environment that affects, if our roster's 30, the number 30 has to feel like they're improving as much as number 1. And we don't want anyone feeling like they got left just because maybe they didn't play as much as, number 1 through 11 did. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing I took from that experience, and kind of how I've used it moving forward.
So as you start to finish up at the college level, and coaching is something you want to do, how do you you mentioned, I think, wrestling as maybe a starting point. Like, how does that come about?
So I was a teacher by trade. So I'm a former teacher, came out as a physical education and health teacher. And my first teaching job was in a small rural town in Iowa, where I taught kindergarten through 4th PE. I was the gifted education teacher, and then I taught freshman health. And part of my job was they said that I could also be the 7th grade girls basketball coach. Never played basketball a day in my life. And as it closely got to that time, the AD/superintendent of this small school was like, hey, we actually could use an assistant junior high wrestling coach. I was like, perfect. And so that was, I would say that was more of like my introductory to that, like in my teaching setting. But the moment I started playing college soccer, I was coaching high school soccer. So I was a high school coach my first year. So at 19, I was an assistant at a high school team in the local area, because in the state of Iowa, high school soccer for boys is played in the spring. So I could play my college season in the fall, and then I went was the assistant in the spring. I was coaching the club team right away. My youth coach brought me back into the club immediately to start coaching teams. So I started coaching at 18 right away. So like soccer coaching is something I was always doing. And then I just added wrestling on top of it to make my teaching salary a little bit more competitive. But no, actually it was tough to live in that small rural town and be away from soccer. Soccer really wasn't a thing. It was hard. So I ended up leaving education and went back to the city, the capital of Iowa, Des Moines, to work and coach, because I miss playing. I miss coaching soccer. So that was kind of like the decision to go back and coach. And I was working in the business world, coaching club, and just kind of like plugging along, coaching how I was coached, and not really developing much as a coach. And I moved to Denver, Colorado, young in my professional career, for my business job. I worked in the insurance industry. I was an underwriter, and I was like, I can't grow up and live in Iowa the rest of my life. So I moved away to Colorado, and I started coaching at a club there. And that's really when the coaching bug took off from I want to be a full-time soccer coach. I started realizing I love that a lot more than I love sitting in a cubicle. This is what I want to do. And I had opportunities at that time to go full-time at the club. And to be honest with you, at the time I was looking at my mentors, the people that I worked with in the club, and most of them were single, or to be honest, like they were divorced and they didn't have a family. And I was watching their lifestyle as a club coach, and I was like, that doesn't match me either. Like, one, I'm a teacher. I like the interaction of being more with students. I want to have a schedule that, again, coaching is hard. The schedule is always hard, but like college coaching, there's a really busy period, and then you have some control over what your year looks like, and club coaching just isn't that. So that's when I made the decision to go back to grad school, get my master's degree, and start pursuing the college path, was at that time. And I returned back to Iowa and have done the college thing for the most part since.
As you're going through this, how important has it been for you to have those moments of kind of self-reflection, that ability? It seems like you're very good at seeing big picture, to be able to watch, say, I saw how my club coach, I went back to that. I did high school. I wasn't a big fan of like wrestling and what have you, but to go to Colorado and to see, like you said, to see what the toll it was taking on people beyond the game of soccer.
Yeah.
How important is that for coaches to be doing constantly?
Yeah. I think that's the part that, and it's interesting. And sometimes the reflection's forced. Like, again, I always I spoke when I met or was with my wife and we were dating. At the time, I'd gone back to grad school, and I was like, all right, I gave up my business job. I'm making no money. I'm living like mattress on the floor. I'm committed to being a college coach. So I don't need a relationship. I need to be alone so I can travel the country and move up the college ranks. Right. That was my brain. I was like, get out of my way, because I need flexibility. That was what I thought. That quickly went away. But then again, it was a blessing, because now when you start to think for two people and not just you, your choices and your decisions you make. Again, your decision is not about you. And that's part of why my path as a college coach has been a little bit windier, because when my decisions were not always just about my professional pursuits, or there was a mix of, all right, what does my wife want to do professionally? She's very successful in her field. And there was a balancing act. Again, that allowed me some reflection of like, what do I want to do? What do I value? Every time there's that choice to be made of, are we going to move for each other's profession? It was another reminder to reflect. And it's like, all right, this is what I want to do. And this is what I want to keep doing. How do I make it happen? And so I think it allowed me not to take the opportunities for granted. Every time we took on a new challenge as a family, be it for her job or mine, yeah, I had to then kind of do another reassessment of where I'm at and what do I value and what do I want to do. And that's how I got back to Hamline. Like, I've spent time, again, we moved to Minnesota. I was in the club world. I was working for a USL2 team. I was assistant Division II coach. But then I realized, no, head coaching is what I want to do. And I want to do it at the Division III level. And this is what I value. And I think it's forced reflection, if that makes sense. Like, the moves forced me to continue to reassess what I value and what's important to me, and keep pushing me in the direction that I go.
Was it, for someone that's as driven as you are to be a head coach, what was the experience of being an assistant and kind of having to follow versus lead, I guess, in a way?
Yeah, I got lucky. So I was at Concordia University of St. Paul. I got lucky with a head coach who was very well aware that he was hiring someone who had just been a head coach for several years before. And so obviously I had the roles of assistant. I did things as an assistant, but there was also that space to take the lead on things, and to share my opinion and my thoughts on things, and to lead groups, and to plan training and run sessions. And that piece was, yeah, a ton of respect for him, because that's not easy to do. I mean, a lot of head coaches, to hire someone who used to be a head coach, that's not always easy. And so the fact that he did that and gave me the space for it, I owe him a ton. And then obviously when the decision came for me to move on to a head coaching job, you supported it 1,000 times and helped me with that process as well. So it was very much, as my peers or my fellow coaches know, and it probably doesn't take much from social media, I have strong opinions on things, on how I think the game should be played and how things should be organized. And there's no bones about it. I know that. It was probably good for me it was hard at first, because I really it's not me. It's not how I would do things. And so there's value in that, right? Then it came back to then reassessing. All right, maybe I thought that was the best idea, but now I've seen him do something different. What can I take from him, and opening myself up? There was a process, and we moved, and I did this during COVID when we couldn't play games and we all had masks on, and I was being tested for COVID twice a week just to be around the players. And yeah, it was hard to then be not the head coach, and to take not necessarily a back seat, but to not always have things go the way in which I wanted them to go. So I think it helped me in the end. I think it made me a better head coach when I came back to it, especially how now I interact with my assistant coaches and where I give them the space to operate as well.
What was it that kind of was the impetus to say, okay, I've got to get back into head coaching? Like, this assistant thing is awesome. I'm learning, I'm getting stretched a little bit, but what was it that you were like, all right, time to make the move?
I think it's outlet for my very strong opinions. That's all. I mean, and how I look at it is the way we feel and see the game differently. And I felt like the time away was good to kind of sharpen and see things differently. But I wanted the challenge again of taking my ideas and sharing it with another group and seeing if it could work. I think that's always how I tested. Like, can I take these things that maybe worked at this school, and it could have worked at that school because it had nothing to do with me. It could have been about the type of player I had there, the personalities I had there. It could be, has nothing to do with me. It could just be, I just got into a good situation. So can I then basically prove that some of these ideas work, or work in the way I want them to work, and take them to a new group and learn how to, maybe I have to reframe it for a new set of players, and I've got to figure out a way to do it in a different conference where the soccer looks a little bit different and it's more competitive. And I think that idea of just constantly trying to figure out, can I do it again? And how do I do or share what I want to do with a new group is always what I'm looking for. And so I think that's what kept pushing me towards going back to it again, is that I want the challenge of the weight of the decision, but also the challenge and the freedom to do some of those ideas and get them expressed when possible.
When it comes to developing your own ideas of how the game should be played, is that from experience and just coaching, or what has kind of gotten you to the point where you have a certain expectation of, this is how I like the game to be played? Is it just seeing other coaches, coaching courses? What has kind of helped you evolve to where you're at now?
It's a mixture of all those things and more. I think it's, I was talking to my assistants the other day. I said I have an internal struggle with college soccer and what I think soccer should be, because I think they're like diametric. I think the two of them they collide. Like it's hard. I have what I would call a global view of the game. I look at how the game's played globally and the trends and what's expected from a player and the tactical trends and those pieces that as the game evolves on a global scale. And then I come into the college environment, and that's sometimes not the case. Their soccer is still being played like the 90s, and it's successful and it works. And it wrecks my brain because I'm like, the two things are at odds at each other. And I think that's the challenge and why I like it is like and it still brings success, and the coaches are good coaches and they help athletes. It's not never meant to be a negative, but as I watch the trends and I watch some of the things that happen in college soccer, they seem like they're at odds with each other. And so I think that is the daily struggle. And I think that's my goal is, all right, how can you separate yourself from the other colleges? Because there's a lot of options, NCAA Division III, there's, 490 schools. There are a lot of options for kids to choose a home and find a fit. So what can we do to help establish a way that attracts a certain type of player that wants to grow and develop in a certain way, that in our mind, we say prepares them for the global version of soccer, not necessarily what wins soccer games on a Saturday in Minnesota, when it's snowing. Like what works globally, not just locally, which again, I'm assessed on my results locally, but I'm always kind of more ruled by views globally, if that makes sense.
How do you get your players to kind of buy into that global idea when they do see the quality of other soccer that is getting, like, they're at the top of the league or they consistently win and they're playing that sort of soccer, but it's not matching to what you guys do?
Yeah, I think there's probably days where they were like, Coach, can we just make this easier? 100%. Like I know there's days, and I'm not foolish to think that there's days where they're like, there's probably an easier way of going about this, or we could probably be more risk averse possibly. And that's part of me adapting and understanding the group as well. And that's part of my growth but for the big part is one, I think they're able to see the value of the why, like how it works and what it looks like when it does come off. And then I've been able to give them examples of, I told, like, I think in my prior stop in Iowa, I first showed them like professional players doing it and professional women players. And they're like, Coach, this is great, but they are pros. We are not professional players. And so the next step was then, no, here's you doing it. This is a Division III athlete who maybe has seen these concepts and these ideas for the first time. And then here's you doing it. So it's not about being a professional. It's about committing to it, training it, and then seeing it come through. And then that's what's reinforced the ideas more than anything is when I'm able to show them doing it. This is you. This is a Division III player doing the same thing that I'm asking you to do and doing it at a good level. And I think that's probably the biggest move as far as showing them the back end of it. The second end is I do think once they experience it and experience soccer potentially in a less chaotic way that gives them control and feels like they're the decision makers, and it's not always risk averse, and it's not just avoiding mistakes. It's more like letting them be brave and be on the ball. And one, I think that fits some of the profiles of players I have. That's what they want. That's why they're here, is they want that space to play and do that. But I also think it takes some other players and helps move them in a new direction to see basically what potentially is there for them as players and how the game can look for them and feel for them as well.
What about coaching women has drawn you to that side that you enjoy?
So I say this on the recruiting visits is like, I was a head coach on the men's side. I was never going to coach women. I was a head college coach, men only. And there's layers. There was like, I was as a younger, and my first head coaching job, I think I was 29. I was all competitive and loud and full of energy. And I was, this big, intense individual. And I was like, I'm never going to do women. I call it fluff. I'm not doing any of this stuff, just men. And in a role, I was an assistant director at a club where I coached like 7 teams, anywhere from U9s to U18s. And during that time, found out my wife and I were going to have a child, and it was a girl. And the moment I found out I was going to have a daughter, like my view on all my girls teams like shifted like night and day. Like all of a sudden they all became my future daughter. But to be honest, I started seeing a couple of things. the role that the social piece plays on the women's side, the importance of the relationships lends itself to an approach where they want to play together. They want to be a more team-oriented team right away. They want to play and combine, and they care for each other, and they're very cognizant of the team. Secondly, even if my idea was foolish or foolhardy at the time, they would give it a go. They would, if I asked them to do something, they would try it. They might come to me and like, I don't know if that's a good idea, but they would try it. If I coached men and I told them something that they didn't believe in, no, they weren't going to do it. They would look at me and be like, no, coach, we don't believe that. We're not in on it yet. And that was early days. And those are obviously huge sweeping generalizations, but that's what I was seeing, was that they wanted to play together. They were playing great soccer together right away. I didn't have to convince them of these team ideas. They were in on it. And they would try some of these crazy ideas I thought I had at the time, and they would give it a go, and they would, again, and then give me direct feedback and then try it again. And I thought that piece was just rare that I hadn't experienced yet. So yeah, I got stuck. I not stuck. I kind of got drawn into it. Yeah, I mean, I could either go back either way. I don't really have a preference anymore, but the women do bring a different experience compared to the other side as a younger coach.
I love how you mentioned just even having your daughter has changed like your whole look. What has that been like, having her growing up and kind of watching you coach and being on the sidelines and being a part of the whole experience that is your coaching?
I think that's probably one of the best things about coaching, is being able to share it with your family, and the connections they have. And, she has, she's 10 years old now. So she's a U12 player, and she comes to practice and they're all her best friends, and she wants to hang out with them. And so that piece is there. And I think to have role models to look up to, and to see them have success and what it looks like and what it means to be a college athlete, just to always have that in front of you, I think is really important for her. But at the same time, I have a 6-year-old son, and he loves it just as much as she does. It's not a gender thing. He wants to know what the score was. He likes being around the team. He likes hanging out with them. He wants to play with them. And yeah, I think it's just, that's the part of coaching, that one of those hidden treats that I enjoyed. When my uncles coached, I was on the sideline of the football games. I was at practice. I experienced as a youth having these role models. And so to be able to share that as well with my children are awesome. My daughter, we traveled to Costa Rica this summer as a team, and she got to go with us. So she was on the sideline. She was doing some of the practices. She got to be on the bench in Costa Rica and watch the team play and hear her dad coach. So from her, she plays. So she kind of has a head start. Like, she has a pretty good brain now for the game, because she hears me and hears it over and over, and speaks a very common language. But yeah, it's been one of the best things about seeing her grow up, is seeing her do it in parallel to my coaching experience and with the players I've had along the way.
You also share the decision-making changes once you have like that significant other in your life. What has she meant in terms of support and all of like the moves? And like you said, it's not always easy in terms of some of the schedules and all that type of stuff. What's it been like having her, in your corner through all of the steps you've had to get to Hamline?
Yeah, no, I think I've been lucky. She's been there from when I was a GA, and I barely had enough money to buy free popcorn at the bar, to, where we're at now. And, yeah, I'm lucky that she came from a family of, her father was a head football coach at the high school level. So she grew up in a household of coaching, which massively helped. She played soccer as well collegiately. So there's a level of understanding of, what it's like, the lifestyle, the movement, the supporting me to move between jobs, and the same thing for her, and supporting her professional pursuits. But I think in another side of it is, she also holds me to accountable for being able to check out of coaching, because she grew up around it. She's able to say, no, you need to be here, be with the family. Like, she forces me, when we all know coaching can be all consuming and it's the only thing in your brain. She kind of gives me a little check, but no, let's get here. Let's be here. We're at home with the family. Come on, let's get out of it. And obviously there's days that's easier than others to be able to do that. But I think that's probably one of the biggest gifts besides the support, is she's able to get me back into the real world. As much as I care about, as big of a part of my life soccer is, and the results and the games and all those moments, it's a good reminder of there's so much more. And, what I do is more than just my soccer at Hamline. Like, there's more, my kids and everything else. So I think her knowledge of the coaching actually helps her be able to keep me in check, versus maybe let it become all consuming for our family.
You just mentioned the all-consuming. What things do you do to get away? Like, are you able to, when she kind of calls you out, are you able to turn the soccer brain off and do some other things, or is it kind of it's always in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I would say I even struggle. Like I say that, but I still struggle. Like it's hard. Like there's a soccer game on TV all the time. There, I'm watching it all the time. It's, and it's varied anywhere from like collegiate women to I'm watching a random like I think it was like there was a Copa Libertadores game between a team from Bolivia and Ecuador. Like again, not like any pop. I'm all over the place in the map what I'm watching, but yeah, I think it's just more of I don't. It's obviously a passion. It's something that I've chosen to do. So I think she understands that. But anything from, all right, the kids are awake, and it's simple things. Why don't you read to our son? Like, how about we read books or something to kind of get me to like again free the space up, give him a bath, do something like that, just to kind of keep me out of my own head. Because she knows as soon as both kids are asleep and she's in bed, it's 10 o'clock. I'm on my laptop and I'm doing something. I'm setting a scouting report. I'm clipping film. I'm doing something. She knows that's going to be there. But she does help me in the other hours when I know I'm on and I need to be there for the family. So yeah, I don't think it's ever out of my brain, to be fair, but yeah, she does a good job. And to be honest, time and age has helped. The more I realize it's not the end of everything, has helped obviously through time. But when you're young, man, it is your whole world. And so yeah, there's a lot of layers that's helped that. But yeah, she definitely helps me kind of click back into the real world every once in a while.
You've talked about all your aspirations of getting to become a head coach. You're there with Hamlin. Is this kind of like where you want to build kind of your legacy, or is there part of you that thinks about maybe D2 or D1 or trying something else?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and this is just the journey as a coach. And yeah, my resume, it looks like I've been all over the place and I've coached in a lot of different places. And I think the big pursuit and how I look at it is there has to be, at the end of all this time, at the end of the commitment and the traveling and the recruiting and the training and the coach education, all the things that you've done to be better as a coach and the stuff that you do, the hope is that you leave something behind. You leave the game in a better place somewhere, that you help a group of people and it lasts and it's extended and it stays that way. And to be honest, just through like our shared professional pursuits, we just haven't had a spot until we came to Minnesota where we feel like we're both in a place where we're not looking for something else. We're not looking for the next step. We can stay right here and do a lot of good things in both of our fields and grow something and have it stand the test of time a little bit more. And that's always been more of my bigger pursuit than anything, is to make sure that I took a place or I helped a place be in a much better place long-term when it came to their soccer program. And I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity here at Hamline and to be able to have it in an environment where I feel like I have the support structure to do that. We still got a ton of work to do, but that's the fun of it. But I think that's the whole, is like find a place where you can really commit to it and do the work and have it last, and not be like 3 years here and then I'm out and then I'm off to a new job. Like give it some legs and let it stand the test of time a little bit more.
One of the things that just almost my selfishly is ask about is you love sharing clips of your team on social media, on Twitter and what have you, and kind of sharing what kind of the growth you've kind of shown, like here's where we're at and where we're at. Why the put it out there? Like a lot of coaches are very timid to put their stuff out there. And I love the fact that you put your product out there and are open to kind of having dialogue about what you're trying to do. Like you talking about creating players that like to take a little bit of risk, but it asks them to be a little bit more daring on the ball and what have you.
It was the old like Ajax Dutch philosophy, was that they share everything, because if I tell you everything I do, then I have to get better. A little bit of that. I joke now that Twitter has gone to bookmarks and you can't see that people favorite or like things. I always joke that there's probably coaches in the conference that just collect my clips that I share for their own scouting. I mean, in the end, we all have each other's games. So I'm joking about that a little bit, but no, I think it's how I've looked at it is that, and I've had strong opinions about coaching education and services and, subscriptions to different like philosophies and methods of coaching and all this access that the internet's given us, right? We can see how a team in Spain, is training, or England, or all these different places, which is great. But the context there is different. The situation is different. And I tried to play from like a positional style of play, which, yeah, we get influenced by Spain or the Netherlands or different parts. We can all look at Pep Guardiola and be, oh my God, I want to be like him. But like, again, different context, different situation. And so part of the reason of sharing is that, one, I want to show like, one, you can do it in our context. It needs to be shown like, no, this is what it looks like to take a group of Division III soccer players in the Midwest who maybe never were trained at this as a youth player. And this is what you can do. This is how we do it. This is how we adapt to our context. Not this works with my U12 boys team in Spain, so now I'm going to take it in and it's going to work magically in Minnesota. No, that's not how it works. So it's really to try to help coaches, one, see like it's all context dependent. Two, it can be done. And it's all variable about your level. Like this, I don't have good enough players, or I can't do it at my level, or college soccer, I got to be more risk averse, or because of the nature of the game. Like, just to give someone maybe some hope that, hey, you can do it if you commit to it and it can be done. And again, my context here is different than the person down the street to me, which doesn't make my methods their methods. But the more we can share how maybe we work in our environment here in the US and our little pocket of space, can we then share that with somewhere else? And I think that's probably what's become the driving mission, is that just showing that it's not impossible. It's not always based on my players aren't good enough. You can do it. You just have to be mindful of how do you take these ideas that you see from abroad and from big teams and make them yours and make them fit your world, which is hard. It's not easy, but it's possible. So I would say that it's more to provide a reference for that.
You started out talking about how your family very coach oriented, and your parents kind of getting pushed into the experience of soccer when you were younger. What has it been for them to see that, that opportunity for you to play has now turned into an actual career and something that you're crushing and getting after?
I think it's like happy to see someone like pursue their, what their passion was. I think that, and they supported me through going back to grad school and knowing that this is what I wanted to do. And I think it's seeing that young kid who, I used to I read this is before soccer.com was a website, and it was a catalog, and it was Eurosport before that. And I used to read soccer catalogs like they were Bibles, because it was the only piece of paper thing soccer wise that I could get. And passionate about everything when it came to soccer gear, or, watching, there was a stretch where the Ajax team of Louis van Gaal was on Sunday mornings, and you could watch the Ajax game on ESPN2. And I was up in the morning watching that because it looked so much different. I watched World Cup 94 and the U.S. national team with Alexi Lalas, and it was a mess. And it was just, no one could keep the ball for the U.S. And I watched Ajax and I was like, this is not the same thing. Where did this come from? So I think knowing that it was a passion, knowing that, it was something that I always wanted to do, and I did it year round and kept playing, just seeing it become, like you said, now it becomes what I get to do for a living, which is what we want for all of our children, probably. Whatever you're passionate about, for it to become what you do because then it's not a job. You get to wake up every day and do what you love, and then it doesn't feel like a job, even though I'm sure there's days where I'm like, yeah, it kind of feels like a job. But no, I think that piece is probably what I'd want for my children. They find their passion, and how does it become what they get to do for their career? And that's the big push.
Last question I have is Hamline year 3. What are some of the things that you've talked about locally? They look at results and what have you. What for you is success, and what are some of your goals as you kind of move into when you get into year 4, year 5, and here in the future?
Yeah, it's progression. Obviously, we're trying to. Year 2 was really rough on results, and I was talking to the group is that the soccer wasn't vastly different. The quality of soccer wasn't vastly different. It's details, right? A save here, a deflection here, and before you know it, momentum in college soccer, like high school soccer, if momentum gets turned in the wrong way, it's sometimes hard to get a hold of it. So I think it's just a continued progression. I think the biggest progression, if we look from year 1 through year 3, is the type of human that we have and the culture that we've built, and how they're now interacting with each other. And the biggest mission was, after my first year in observing, was I tried to explain it as we had, and this was, again, broad generalization, we had a group of really competitive players that really wanted to find success and train hard, and they really wanted to be pushed athletically. We had another group where soccer was really important to them, but it fit more of a social need. College environment, this was their social group. They love soccer, but they weren't driven in the same way that the first group was. The first group maybe bypassed some of those relationships because it was more like, I want success. So they would maybe bypass the work on the relationships to find success on the field. The other group maybe bypassed some of the success on the field to maintain positive relationships. And the biggest mission since then has been, I always said it was an or situation. They felt like they had to choose one or the other. And now what we're doing is it's an and situation. It's high expectations, high, high training environment, like really demanding, and really focus on the relationship piece and doing the same thing on both sides. It's not or. So can you be really driven on the field and have really close relationships with your teammates? So I would say those are the progression pieces that are not always seen from a result standpoint. And I think it showed up this year in ways that, yeah, where we're at right now, we've had a few 0-0 draws in games that we've turned around from last year. We're turning some results around where the game feels different. There's more control. There's some elements to our depth that are being able to perform that we wouldn't see in years past because of the relationship piece and some of the connections that they've made off the field. So yeah, the mission is obviously to continue to see if we do the right things, the result piece comes with it. We have a back-to-back weekend. We have a really tough conference game tomorrow against St. Olaf College, and then we have our last non-conference on Sunday. So we've got 2 tough games here coming up that I would say it's another test to see where we're at in that pursuit and to see kind of where we're at in our progression. But the hope is that it just continues, right? Is that we just keep pushing this momentum as we go into year 4. And the hope is, yeah, it's a constant climb. We know there's going to be years where it's a bit of a dip and then we go again. But as long as it's still moving in the right direction, we can be happy with it.
Michael, I've really enjoyed this chat, and that's a perfect way to shut this thing down. This is Karen Coach's Corner Chats with Michael Prunty, and I'm out.
All right. Thank you.
Peace.